Okay, let's start. Number 1. Mohenjo-daro. The year is 1922. You're a British archaeologist named John Marshall, and you've just unearthed a city that shouldn't exist. Beneath the sun-baked earth of modern Pakistan, beneath layers of silt and silence, you've found grid-plan streets, sewage systems more sophisticated than anything Rome would build 2,000 years later, and a great bath sealed with waterproof mortar from a civilization that flourished in 2600 BCE. Then, in the uppermost layers, you find something that stops every theory cold. Skeletons, not buried, not arranged in graves. Just lying in the streets, some clutching each other, frozen mid-step, as if everyone in this city of 40,000 people stopped existing at exactly the same moment. Mohenjo-daro, which translates to Mound of the Dead Men in Sindhi, was the largest city of the Indus Valley civilization. At its peak around 2500 BCE, it covered more than 600 acres along what is now the Indus River in Pakistan. The city possessed an elaborate drainage network, public granaries, a great bath lined with bitumen-sealed brick, and multi-story residences with indoor plumbing. This was a metropolis running at full capacity for 800 years. By 1900 BCE, it was completely abandoned. The mainstream explanation is climate-driven collapse. Monsoon patterns shifted. The Ghaggar-Hakra river system dried up. The population migrated east gradually over centuries. The city didn't die overnight. It faded. But the skeletons in the streets don't cooperate with that explanation. Archaeologist Francis Taylor, examining excavation data in the decades following the original dig, noted that human remains cluster specifically in the uppermost occupation layer, suggesting death came fast and at one moment not slowly across generations. The bodies show no signs of massacre, no weapons lodged in bone, no epidemic patterning, no mass burial preparation, just people lying where they were, in a city that stopped. In 1979, British researcher David Davenport and Italian professor Ettore Vincenti published a study claiming the evidence pointed to an ancient nuclear or nuclear-like event. After 8 years of field research, they reported a 50-yard-wide epicenter near the city's center where clay and brick appeared fused and crystallized, requiring surface temperatures of approximately 2,700 degrees Fahrenheit to achieve instantly. Beyond the epicenter, structural damage radiates outward in patterns similar to the blast zones documented at Hiroshima after 1945. Most geologists reject this interpretation. The vitrified material, they argue, can be explained by standard kiln firing or natural heating processes. The skeletal clustering is overstated. No peer-reviewed radiation study of the site has confirmed anomalous readings. But then there is the Mahabharata, the ancient Sanskrit epic, predating the Common Era by centuries and carrying oral traditions older still, describes a weapon called the Brahmastra. A blast brighter than 10,000 suns that left no smoke, caused hair and nails to fall from survivors, made water boil on contact, and turned birds white. It reads less like mythology and more like a witness account rendered in the only language available to someone who had survived something they had no category for. Clinical radiation sickness described with unnerving precision in a text produced by a civilization contemporary with Mohenjo-daro's collapse. The Indus Valley people left behind thousands of seal tablets covered in an intricate script. That script has never been decoded. Not one word. We don't know what they called themselves, what they feared, or who they worshipped. Whatever they encountered in those final hours, before the streets filled with silent bodies, they could not tell us. The city is the only record they left. Grain in the storerooms, dishes untouched, jewelry unattended in workshops. That's what makes Mohenjo-daro different from every other ancient collapse. Civilizations leave wreckage and ash and a trail of decline. Mohenjo-daro left a city paused, not ended. As if the people weren't destroyed so much as removed. What generated a 2,700 degree Fahrenheit epicenter in a city with no smelting industry capable of that heat? Why do the human remains show none of the expected signatures of plague, battle, or famine? And if the Mahabharata's Brahmastra is mythology, why does it describe radiation sickness with clinical precision 3,500 years before nuclear physics existed? 40 miles to the northwest sat a sister city that vanished at exactly the same time. Whatever reached Mohenjo-daro didn't stop there. Number 2. The Anasazi. The year is 1300 CE. You're on a sandstone cliff face in what is now the American Southwest, 500 feet above the valley floor, helping to finish a city built directly into the rock. Cliff Palace at Mesa Verde, 150 rooms, 23 ceremonial kivas, a watchtower visible for miles across the canyon. Your people have been building higher and deeper into the cliff for generations, pressing themselves against the stone, retreating toward the rock, as if putting the canyon walls between themselves and something below. Then, in a period tree rings later date to less than a single generation, everyone leaves. Completely. No note, no trail. Half-eaten meals still in clay bowls. Tools exactly where workers set them down. A city mid-breath. The Anasazi, whose name derives from a Navajo term meaning ancient enemy or ancient ones who are not us, built one of the most sophisticated civilizations in pre-Columbian North America. Between 700 CE and 1300 CE, they constructed hundreds of cliff dwellings across the Four Corners region, including Cliff Palace, the largest cliff dwelling on the continent. They developed elaborate road systems, astronomical observatories, and long-distance trade networks extending into Central America. At their height, they governed communities of tens of thousands from canyon cities reachable only by hand-carved toeholds in vertical rock. The standard explanation for their disappearance involves a convergence of pressures. A severe drought confirmed by tree ring data between 1276 and 1299 CE, soil depletion, deforestation, and raids from newcomer cultures. The Anasazi, according to mainstream archaeology, relocated south and southeast, becoming the ancestors of modern Pueblo peoples. A difficult migration, but a human one. But drought migrations look different from this. People leave in stages. They consume stored food, carry valuables, and leave wreckage. At Anasazi sites across the southwest, archaeologists found the opposite. Food sealed in jars. Ritual objects in place. At Chaco Canyon, Anasazi Ceremonial Center, and the hub of their road network, researchers documented an estimated 200,000 pieces of turquoise simply left behind, the most prized trade material in the pre-Columbian Southwest. Abandoned without a second trip. And then there is the rock art. Across canyon walls throughout the region, the Anasazi carved petroglyphs depicting figures that match nothing in their natural world. Large oval heads. No visible ears or noses. Elongated torsos with proportions inconsistent with human anatomy. Some figures appear to hover. Some are encircled by halos or radiating lines. In 1978, researcher J.J. Hurtak cataloged more than 300 Anasazi petroglyph sites and documented over 40 distinct figure-with-helmet depictions. Round enclosed head coverings, large oval Y coverings, and full-body suits inconsistent with any known Anasazi garment. The same figure, appearing consistently across geographically isolated sites with no direct contact between them. The Hopi, who consider themselves descendants of the Anasazi, preserve a specific tradition about beings called the Kachina, sky spirits that descended, taught, guided, and eventually departed. Their oral account of the Great Migration doesn't describe a drought. It describes something coming, something expected. When it arrived, the people went with it. The road systems the Anasazi built radiate outward from Chaco Canyon in perfectly straight lines. Some stretch 30 miles across terrain with significant elevation changes. They are too wide for single-file foot travel and show no evidence of use as standard transit routes. They don't follow the most logical paths between communities. The straightness serves no purpose for people navigating on foot, but would be meaningful to something observing from altitude. Who were the beings depicted in identical form across hundreds of geographically isolated sites? Why did a drought-driven migration leave 200,000 pieces of turquoise behind? And where did tens of thousands of people go in less than a generation, leaving no burial sites, no trail, no body count? They vanished the same way they built, with precision and without explanation. Number 3. The Sumerians. The year is 2400 BCE. You're a scribe in the city of Nippur, in what is now southern Iraq, pressing a reed stylus into wet clay by lamplight. The wedge-shaped marks hardening into the oldest written records on Earth. But you're not composing myths. Your teachers were very specific about that. What you are recording is history. The account of beings called the Anunnaki, who descended from the sky, who shaped humanity from clay and divine substance, who built the first cities, who inscribed the first laws, and who, after many thousands of years of physical presence among human beings, gathered their belongings and left, not as metaphor, as fact. Sumer was the world's first urban civilization, emerging in Mesopotamia around 4500 BCE. The Sumerians invented writing, the wheel, the 60-minute hour, the 360-degree circle, the first legal codes, and the first organized schools. Anthropologists call what happened next the Sumerian problem. These developments did not emerge through any visible developmental chain. Pottery levels that predate Sumerian culture show a hunter-gatherer society. What appears above those layers is a functioning urban civilization with full administrative, legal, and agricultural systems already in place. The transition is archaeologically invisible. The mainstream explanation involves regional exchange of ideas from surrounding cultures, with the transitional periods simply undiscovered or too fragmentary to read. Civilization bootstraps when conditions converge. The apparent suddenness is a gap in the record, not in the development. But the Sumerian texts describe a different origin. The Enuma Elish, the Atrahasis epic, and the Sumerian king list describe the Anunnaki as physical beings, not spiritual forces, not symbolic constructs. Beings who landed, built facilities, worked in organized shifts, argued, reproduced, and eventually departed. Their presence in the texts isn't poetic, it's administrative. They appear in the same flat matter-of-fact voice the Sumerians used to record grain inventories and labor quotas. If this is mythology, the Sumerians had no linguistic register to distinguish it from record-keeping. Zecharia Sitchin's 1976 translations propose the Anunnaki were extraterrestrials from a planet he called Nibiru. Most Assyriologists have contested his specific linguistic readings, and his planetary science doesn't hold. But the mainstream position still has to account for one thing it hasn't explained: the astronomical knowledge. The Sumerians accurately described the outer planets of the solar system. Uranus wasn't confirmed by European astronomy until William Herschel observed it in 1781. Neptune wasn't identified until 1846. Pluto not until 1930. Cuneiform tablets produced around 3000 BCE describe planetary bodies in positions consistent with these planets, with the texts attributing this knowledge directly to the Anunnaki. How did scribes working in Mesopotamia describe planets invisible to the naked eye, 4,800 years before the telescopes required to see them existed? The cross-cultural convergence compounds the difficulty. Egyptian, Hindu, and Chinese texts all describe similar eras of extended divine or semi-divine rule before a transition to shorter-lived human governance. The Sumerian king list records rulers whose reigns spanned tens of thousands of years before a flood event, with dramatically shorter reigns afterward. These parallel accounts across cultures with no documented contact are either an extraordinary coincidence in every civilization's mythology simultaneously, or a common memory of something that actually occurred. Here's what the Sumerian record is specific about. The Anunnaki withdrew before the collapse began. The last accounts of their direct involvement describe a departure from specific locations. The cities didn't fall while the Anunnaki were present. They fell after. Did a non-human intelligence directly shape the first human civilization and transmit knowledge of planetary bodies that required instruments to see instruments that wouldn't be invented for 5 more millennia? How does a hunter-gatherer culture become a fully organized urban civilization in a single invisible transition? And why did the Sumerians record the departure of their teachers in the same administrative tone they used to record the harvest? The next civilization they visited left a different kind of record. Lines carved into the earth so large they can only be understood from the sky. Number 4. The Nazca. The year is 550 CE. You're on a high desert plateau in what is now southern Peru, the driest non-polar place on Earth, and you're carving a message into the ground. Not with technology. With your hands and simple tools, under a sky so clear at this altitude it feels close enough to touch. You remove rust-colored surface stones to reveal the pale yellow-gray earth beneath, and you're making a hummingbird 935 feet long from wingtip to wingtip, a spider 1550 feet across, a monkey with a spiraling tail. From ground level, these shapes are invisible. You can't see them from where you stand. You have no aircraft, no balloon, no elevated vantage point to verify your work. You're drawing a picture for something that looks down from very far above. The Nazca lines are a collection of geoglyphs on the Nazca Desert Plateau in southern Peru, created by the Nazca culture between 500 BCE and 500 CE. They cover approximately 200 square miles of the Pampa Colorada. There are 2 categories: geometric shapes and perfectly straight lines extending more than 30 miles across terrain with 200-foot elevation changes, without deviation. and biomorphs, enormous animal and humanoid figures. The straight lines maintain their precision across the uneven landscape without any variation visible from altitude. The mainstream explanation is religious ceremony. The geoglyphs were ritual pathways, the animal figures spiritual symbols, the lines astronomical alignments. The intended audience was the gods, looking down from the sky. The Nazca built these things because divine beings observed them from above, and they were communicating for that audience. The problem is that this explanation concedes the essential mystery. If the intended audience was gods looking down from the sky, then the Nazca themselves believed they were communicating with something airborne, something that could see what was invisible from the ground. Among the geoglyphs is a figure called El Astronauta, the astronaut, a humanoid roughly 100 feet tall, with a disproportionately large round head, enormous almond-shaped eyes, no visible nose or mouth, and a protrusion extending from the skull. Eric von Daniken popularized this as a being in a spacesuit in 1968. Professional archaeologists reject that reading. But the Nazca ceramic record provides a parallel track that is harder to dismiss. Across centuries of Nazca pottery, from 200 CE to 700 CE, the same figures recur. Beings wearing enclosed head coverings, beings with elongated skulls, beings depicted descending from above on what appear to be rays or beams. Not as isolated artistic experiments, consistently generation after generation, as if the visual tradition was built around something actually seen. The spider geoglyph carries a specific anomaly outside any ritual explanation. The spider depicted belongs to the genus Raciniulae, found exclusively in remote Amazon rainforest 1,500 miles from the Nazca Plateau. The Nazca had no documented contact with the Amazon. Raciniulae are so small that identifying them at genus level requires a magnifying glass. The Nazca drew a spider they couldn't have seen with the naked eye, from a region they'd never visited, with enough anatomical precision that modern entomologists can confirm the genus from the carving. The civilization's collapse around 75 CE is attributed to El Nino-driven flooding, followed by severe drought. Archaeological evidence supports catastrophic environmental disruption. But the pattern of the final period is what makes researchers uncomfortable. Rather than declining output, the final layers show escalating production. Larger geoglyphs, more intensive ceremony, increased activity. A culture dying of drought conserves its resources. The Nazca intensified theirs. This looks like desperation. A signal turned up as high as it can go before the station goes silent. What were the beings depicted in consistent ceramic imagery, generation after generation, descending on rays from above? How did the Nazca draw a genus of spider found only 1,500 miles away, requiring magnification to identify? And what were they trying to transmit in those final years, carving larger and larger messages into the ground for something that had stopped responding? The plateau went silent around 750 CEE. The lines are still there. Number 5. Tiwanaku. The year is 900 CE. You're standing at 12,500 feet above sea level in what is now Bolivia, at the center of an empire stretching from the Pacific coast to the edge of the Amazon basin. Around you rise temples built from stone blocks weighing up to 450 tons, quarried 56 miles away, transported across the surface of Lake Titicaca on red boats, then raised into place with no surviving evidence of the mechanism that lifted them. A few hundred yards away at the satellite complex of Pumapunku, 8-shaped andesite blocks sit with interior channels machined to a tolerance that modern craftsmen using diamond-tipped equipment struggle to replicate. Your civilization has held this plateau for 1,500 years. Then, in less than a single generation, every one of your people is gone, the construction sites abandoned exactly as they stood. Tiwanaku flourished from approximately 300 CE to 1000 CE, controlling a vast territory centered on the Titicaca Basin in modern Bolivia. At its height, the city housed an estimated 10,000 to 20,000 people and served as a religious and administrative capital for a regional population of several hundred thousand. The companion site of Pumapunku, dated to approximately 536 CE, contains megalithic stonework of a precision that has no parallel in the ancient world. The mainstream explanation for Pumapunku's construction relies on sophisticated labor organization, rope and log transport, and patient hand carving. The 450-ton stones were moved by human effort with inclined planes. The precision cuts were achieved through repeated scoring and abrasion over time. There's no technological mystery, only commitment and ingenuity underestimated by modern observers. But the stone at Pumapunku contains features that don't fit manual labor explanations. The hack-shaped blocks contain interior channels cut to within 0.04 inches of tolerance, a precision matched in the modern era only by CNC machine tools. Multiple identical blocks appear produced from the same template or casting process rather than individually hand-carved. The saw marks on cut surfaces show a progressively narrowing kerf, a groove that narrows as it deepens, the distinctive signature of a rotating blade. Not a chisel. Not scoring. A rotating saw, in the year 536 CE, at 12,500 feet above sea level. In 2015, excavation notes from archaeologist Julio Tello's earlier work at Tiwanaku's subterranean temple were re-examined by researchers. The sunken courtyard contains 175 stone heads carved into its walls, each depicting a distinct face. Some show anatomy that doesn't correspond to any ethnic population in South America. Enlarged eye sockets, elongated skull proportions, facial geometry that sits outside the normal range of human variation. Elongated skulls recovered throughout the Tiwanaku region confirm deliberate cranial modification in the local population, but some specimens extend further than standard binding techniques can physically achieve. Tiwanaku's collapse around 1000 CE is attributed to a prolonged megadrought confirmed by Lake Titicaca sediment cores. The agricultural system that fed the city failed. The population dispersed, but the abandonment doesn't match a gradual dispersal. Ceremonial centers were in some cases deliberately dismantled. Cultural objects were buried rather than carried. At Pumapunku, blocks were left half-fitted, construction sequences end mid-assembly. Not decline, a stoppage. Work that stopped on a specific day and did not resume. What makes the Aymara oral tradition quietly devastating is its account of who built this place. The Aymara, who consider themselves descendants of Tiwanaku's population, described the original builders as beings who came from elsewhere, constructed the first structures, and departed when their work was done. The human population moved in after, not as metaphor, as a description of sequence. What technology produced interior stone channels to 0.04-inch tolerance at 12,500 feet altitude in 536 CE? Whose faces are the 175 heads in the subterranean temple depicting? And why did an entire civilization's ceremonial infrastructure get deliberately buried and abandoned, as if responding to a single specific signal? The stones are still there. The answer to who placed them is not. Number 6. The Minoans. The year is 1600 BCE. You're in the palace of Knossos, on the island of Crete, inside the largest Bronze Age building in the Aegean. It covers 6 acres, contains more than 1,300 rooms, and has water running through terracotta pipes connected to a roof collection system. The frescoes on the walls depict dolphins, acrobatic bull leapers, and women with elaborate coiled hair performing rituals no other culture has recorded. Your civilization invented Europe's first writing system. You operate a 100-ship merchant fleet. Your palace has flush toilets. In approximately 1450 BCE, every major center of Minoan civilization, Knossos, Akrotiri, Phaistos, Zakros, will be destroyed or abandoned within a few decades. The most advanced maritime culture in the Bronze Age will simply be gone, and no one will agree on what ended it. The Minoans flourished on Crete and the surrounding Aegean islands from approximately 2700 BCE to 1450 BCE. They were Europe's first advanced civilization, predating classical Greece by more than 1,000 years. Their palace complexes demonstrate engineering sophistication unmatched by any contemporary Mediterranean culture. Their religious art is unlike anything surrounding them. Women hold ritual authority, nature is central to spiritual life, and their iconography includes double axes, sacred bulls, and serpents. Whatever the Minoans believed, they built it into every surface. The mainstream explanation for the collapse is the Thera eruption. Around 1620 to 1600 BCE, the volcanic island of Santorini exploded at an estimated 4 to 5 times the power of Krakatoa. The resulting tsunamis, ash fall, and disruption weakened Minoan civilization. Mycenaean Greeks moved into the power vacuum. By 1450 BCE, the takeover was complete. But the timeline doesn't hold. The Thera eruption predates the destruction of the palace centers by 150 to 170 years. A civilization doesn't absorb the worst volcanic event in Mediterranean history and then collapse a century and a half later from the same cause. Other mechanisms were involved, and what those mechanisms were remains genuinely unresolved. Linear A, the Minoan writing system, has never been decoded. Not a single word. Whatever the Minoans recorded about their civilization, their history, their beliefs, their accounts of what visited their islands is locked in a script no living person can read. The answer to what ended their civilization may exist on a clay tablet in a museum collection, permanently beyond us. But their visual art is not encrypted. Seal stones recovered from Minoan sites depict beings with enlarged heads, disproportionate eye proportions, and figures descending from above accompanied by rays or beams. Ritual scenes preserved at Akrotiri under Tharus eruption ash show processional figures moving toward elevated positions, occupied by beings depicted physically differently from surrounding humans, larger, structurally distinct, receiving offerings rather than giving them. In Minoan burial contexts, archaeologists have recovered skulls with cranial modification, extending beyond what standard binding techniques achieve the same pattern found at Tiwanaku, 6,000 miles away, 1,400 years later. Two unconnected civilizations, modifying skulls in the same direction, toward the same non-standard shape. The legend of Daedalus, preserved across classical Greek sources, including Apollodorus and Ovid, describes a craftsman of extraordinary ability who arrived at Knossos, built the labyrinth for King Minos, and then departed by constructing wings and flying away. The Greek word daedalus means cunningly wrought, a quality of workmanship beyond normal craft. The legends consistently note that Daedalus was not from Crete. He came. He built something unprecedented. He left. What destroyed the Minoan palace centers in the century and a half between the Thera eruption and 1450 BCE? Who were the physically distinct beings depicted receiving offerings in their ritual art? Why do Minoan burial sites share cranial anomalies with Tiwanaku across 6,000 miles of ocean? And what is depicted on the seal stones descending toward the island on rays? Their writing might answer every question. We cannot read a single word of it. Number 7. The Akkadian Empire. The year is 2200 BCE. You're a provincial governor inside the first empire in recorded human history, and the messages from the capital have stopped. For a decade, the grain tax collectors haven't come. The royal military hasn't moved. The administrative tablets that once coordinated everything from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean have gone silent. When you finally send your own messengers north to Akkad, they don't find warfare. They don't find famine. They find something harder to explain. The city of Akkad, capital of the world's first empire, home to more than 100,000 people, is empty. The largest city of the ancient world has vanished from the landscape. Akkad has never been found by archaeologists. After more than a century of intensive excavation across the most studied region on Earth, the physical capital of the world's first empire remains unlocated. The Akkadian Empire was established by Sargon of Akkad around 2334 BCE, the first ruler in recorded history to unify multiple city-states under a single administrative system. At its peak under Naram-Sin, Sargon's grandson, the empire controlled approximately 500,000 square miles, stretching from the Persian Gulf to the Syrian coast. It maintained a standing army, appointed governors, a standardized postal system, and the most sophisticated administrative apparatus the ancient world had yet produced. The system functioned for roughly 180 years. Around 2154 BCE, it collapsed. The mainstream explanation is the 4.2 kiloyear event, a global climate disruption around 2200 BCE that produced a 200-year drought across the Middle East and Eastern Mediterranean, confirmed by lake sediment cores and cave stalagmite data. Grain production collapsed. The administrative system couldn't function without agricultural surpluses. The empire fragmented. Subject cities declared independence. Gutian people from the Zagros Mountains delivered the final blow. But drought explains fragmentation, not disappearance. When empires fall from resource failure, the cities remain. Populations scatter, but buildings don't. Akkad, a city of 100,000 people, constructed of fired brick, in the same geographic zone as ancient Babylon, which has been found and excavated in meticulous detail, should be findable. It isn't. 3,000 years of archaeology, and not one archaeologist has stood in the ruins of the capital of the First Empire. A Sumerian document called the Curse of Agade, analyzed in detail by scholars Samuel Noah Kramer and Thorkild Jacobsen, describes the collapse in terms that read less like theology and more like an administrative after-action report. The text describes Enlil, chief deity of the Sumerian pantheon, physically withdrawing his presence from specific temple locations in Akkad following Naram-Sin's destruction of the sacred temple at Nippur. What follows is a precise sequenced list: specific military incursions, specific crop failures, specific social collapses, attributed in each case to the withdrawal of Enlil's physical presence from those locations. The text is written as history. The Sumerians maintained separate literary genres for history and mythology. This was filed as history. The Akkadian texts consistently describe the gods as administrators with physical presence in specific structures. They occupied particular buildings. They managed particular functions. Their presence sustained the systems around them. When Naram-Sin attacked Nippur and damaged the divine house, the gods left their houses. The empire ended after they left, not during their presence. The stele of Naram-Sin, now in the Louvre, is the greatest surviving monument of Akkadian power. It depicts Naram-Sin ascending a mountain toward a divine figure from whom rays or beams descend. The inscription frames this as military victory. Contemporary Sumerian texts record it as the moment everything began to end. What happened to the 100,000 residents of Akkad in a city that comprehensive archaeology has never found? What were the divine houses the gods departed from described in the texts as physical structures that required their presence to function? And what did Naram-Sin encounter on that mountain that his own contemporaries recorded as the beginning of the end? The empire that followed them knew better than to ask. Number 8. Easter Island. The year is 1250 CE. You're on the most remote inhabited island on Earth, a volcanic triangle 14 miles long in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, and you're carving a face into the side of a volcanic crater. The face is 30 feet tall and weighs 80 tons. Deep-set eye sockets that will hold inlaid coral and obsidian eyes. A prominent brow ridge. A jaw that extends further than any human jaw. You're carving it for reasons older than your grandparents can fully explain. Beings came to this island once. These statues are for them. When the Dutch captain Jacob Roggeveen approaches on April 5, 1722, the first European to see this place, he will find 2,000 to 3,000 people living among nearly 1,000 of these statues. Many are face down in the soil. Many are half finished. All creation has stopped at the same moment. He will ask who made these. No one will have a satisfactory answer. Easter Island, called Te Pito o Te Henua in the indigenous Rapa Nui language. The navel of the world was settled by Polynesian peoples around 700 to 900 CE. At its peak around 1200 CE, between 10,000 and 15,000 people lived on the island. They carved 887 known moai at the Rano Raraku quarry from Kaka, compressed volcanic ash, and transported them miles to ceremonial platforms called AHU, where the statues were erected facing inland, watching over the communities behind them with inlaid eyes that caught the light. The mainstream explanation for why production stopped is ecological collapse. The Rapa Nui deforested the island to move the statues. Without trees, they couldn't build offshore fishing canoes. Without fish, the food supply failed. The civilization collapsed through starvation and violence. By 1722, what Roggeveen found was a society in ruins. But the Rano Raraku quarry doesn't show the gradual wind down of a dying industry. Of the 397 moai remaining there in various stages of completion, the production didn't taper off. It stopped. Tools left exactly where workers set them down. A moai 2/3 complete abandoned mid-carving. Multiple statues in different stages of production, stopped on what appears to have been the same day. Not decline. A work stoppage, abrupt and total. The oral traditions of the Rapa Nui, recorded by early European missionaries and ethnographers in the 18th and 19th centuries, are specific about what the moai represented. Not dead chiefs. Not generalized ancestors. The Ariki Mau. Ancient beings who were not the same kind as the island's current inhabitants. And the original builders, called the Long Ears in Rapa Nui tradition, were described with an anatomical specificity that doesn't fit artistic convention. The Long Ears arrived on vessels that moved without sails and glowed in the dark. The moa's elongated ear features and non-Polynesian body proportions may not be stylistic. They may be representations of what the Long Ears actually looked like. The Pukau, large cylindrical red stone topknots placed on some moai after their erection, weigh up to 13 tons each, and were placed on statues already standing 30 feet tall. No proposed mechanism ramp, lever. A frame adequately explains how a 13-ton object was placed on a 30-foot tall, standing stone without leaving archaeological evidence of the infrastructure required. Archaeoastronomer William Liller mapped the orientations of Easter Island's Ahu platforms in the 1990s and found statistical correlations with specific star risings and settings. Some platforms face celestial positions corresponding to known astronomical events, but a small subset face positions with no identifiable stellar correspondence, nothing in the sky above the Easter Island horizon that matches what they're pointing toward. Who were the Long Ears, and why did generations of islanders maintain a tradition of building statues for beings who preceded them? What caused the sudden total work stoppage at Rano Raraku, with tools left mid-task? And what are the Ahu oriented toward that has no name in the sky above them? The statues are still watching. They haven't said. Number 9. Gobekli Tepe. The year is 8000 BCE. You're at the top of a mountain in what is now southeastern Turkey, and you're burying it. Not a body. A temple. The largest ritual complex on Earth, 12,000 years old, containing limestone pillars up to 18 feet tall and 50 tons each. Arranged in precise circles and decorated with high-relief carvings of animals, cut with craft that rivals work produced 8,000 years later. You and hundreds of others are filling it in. Deliberately, systematically, covering every stone, every carving, every circle under thousands of tons of rubble and debris. When you're done, the hilltop will be bare and empty, and the people who built this place will disappear from the archaeological record entirely, leaving behind only what they chose to conceal. Gobekli Tepe, in southeastern Turkey near the modern city of Şanlıurfa, was discovered in 1994 by German archaeologist Klaus Schmidt, who recognized that what local farmers had assumed were ordinary stones were the tops of massive buried pillars. The site is the oldest known megalithic structure on Earth, predating Stonehenge by 6,000 years and the Egyptian pyramids by 7,000 years. At least 20 circular enclosures have been identified, with only a fraction excavated. The T-shaped limestone pillars, quarried and transported up a hillside by people who, according to every prior developmental model, were hunter-gatherers without the social organization for monumental construction, weigh up to 50 tons each. The mainstream explanation accepts this as a necessary revision to how civilization developed. Organized religion and monumental architecture preceded agriculture, not the other way around. The builders were sophisticated pre-agricultural people whose social cooperation was driven by shared ritual. The site was deliberately buried around 8000 BCE when its function concluded, and the builders transitioned to settled agricultural life, eventually contributing to the emergence of Mesopotamian civilization. That explanation accounts for the organizational question. It says nothing about what the pillars are actually carved with. The shaped pillars at Gobekli Tepe carry two categories of imagery. First, naturalistic animal carvings of extraordinary quality, foxes, vultures, scorpions, snakes, ducks, lions, rendered with anatomical precision that has no developmental precursor in any prior archaeological layer. Second, the pillars themselves. The shape is a stylized anthropomorphic, form a headless human body, enormously tall, arms pressed to the sides, hands clasped across the abdomen. The beings depicted at Gobekli Tepe are not the animal carvings. The beings are the pillars, headless, enormous, standing at the center of every enclosure. In 2017, researchers Martin Sweatman and Dimitri Tsakritsis published an analysis in the journal Mediterranean Archaeology and Archaeometry, arguing that the animal carvings encoded astronomical data. A record of a major comet impact event around 10,950 BCE, corresponding to the onset of the Younger Dryas, a sudden global cooling that interrupted the post-Ice Age warming and lasted approximately 1,300 years. The vulture stone, Pillar 43, depicts a configuration of animals that matches specific constellations as they appeared at the time of the proposed impact. To a statistical confidence, the authors calculated at greater than 95%. This would make Gobekli Tepe a warning system. A record of civilization-ending catastrophe encoded in durable stone, built by survivors who understood that stone survives when everything else doesn't. The Younger Dryas impact hypothesis, supported by geologists Richard Firestone and Alan West, proposes that a comet or asteroid impact triggered the Cold Period. If a prior civilization existed during the warm interlude before the Younger Dryas and was destroyed by the impact, Gobekli Tepe may be the survivors' attempt to preserve the memory of what caused it and perhaps a record of who warned them first. There are no human remains at Gobekli Tepe, no graves, no habitation debris. The builders used this site for approximately 1,000 years, then covered it systematically, and left. They did not bury their dead here. They buried the monument itself. Who built a megalithic astronomical record 12,000 years ago, encoded a warning about a civilization-ending impact, and then buried the evidence? Who are the headless anthropomorphic beings at the center of every enclosure? And what were they warning about? One final civilization may have encountered them and left us the answer. Number 10. The Bronze Age collapse. The year is 1200 BCE. You're a palace administrator in the city of Ugarit on the Syrian coast, and you're writing the last letter this city will ever send. The clay tablet will never arrive. It will be found in a kiln 3,200 years later, still undelivered, its contents describing enemy ships seen offshore, farms burning on the horizon, and an appeal for immediate military aid. Within the next 50 years, every major Bronze Age civilization in the eastern Mediterranean will be gone. The Egyptian New Kingdom, the Hittite Empire, the Mycenaean Greeks, the Ugaritic Kingdom, the Cypriots, the Canaanites. In a 50-year window around 1200 BCE, more than 3,000 years of interconnected civilization trade routes, palace economies, literacy, bronze production, the entire web of the ancient world collapses simultaneously across every culture, with a completeness that produces a 400-year dark age. Nothing like it has happened before or since in recorded history. No one has ever fully agreed on what caused it. The Bronze Age collapse is the most mysterious, catastrophic event in ancient history. The civilizations that fell were deeply interconnected through trade and diplomacy, some for centuries. When destruction at archaeological sites across Greece, Turkey, Lebanon, Israel, and Cyprus is dated, it clusters in the same narrow 50-year window. The Mycenaean palace at Pylos burned. The Hittite capital at Hattusa was abandoned, and its empire dissolved. Ugarit was destroyed and never rebuilt. Egypt survived, but so weakened it never recovered its former reach. The mainstream explanation is multi-causal. Historian and archaeologist Eric Klein, whose 2014 book, 1177 BC, is the most comprehensive academic account of the collapse, argues for a perfect storm. Drought, internal rebellion, disrupted trade, and attacks by peoples Egyptian records call the Sea Peoples. When one palace economy destabilized, the interconnected system that sustained the others unraveled in sequence. No single cause. A system failure. This explanation is reasonable for the political collapse. It doesn't account for the Sea Peoples. They are described in detail in Egyptian records from the reign of Ramesses III, listed by name, depicted in relief carvings at Medinet Habu, showing their ships, weapons, and physical appearance. Klein himself acknowledges in 1177 BC that the Sea Peoples remain unidentified. Their ships don't match any known vessel type in the contemporary Mediterranean. Their weapons and armor in the Egyptian reliefs correspond to no identified culture. Their language is unknown. Their origin is unknown. A coalition of peoples large enough to bring down the entire Bronze Age appeared, destroyed, and vanished from history without a traceable origin or destination. Every subsequent civilization they encountered failed to identify them. Not one has named them in any surviving record. The destruction patterns at collapse sites add another layer that receives little mainstream attention. At multiple sites, including Hazor in Israel and several Mycenaean centers, the burning is too comprehensive and too indiscriminate to be consistent with human rating. Armies take grain, metals, and captives. They burn what they can't carry. But at collapse sites, the destruction hits the highest status palace structures and the lowest status residential neighborhoods simultaneously, with the same intensity. Economically motivated raiders don't destroy what they could take. And at several sites, the destruction layer shows burning from above roof structures consuming first, not ground level. The Egyptian hieroglyphic term for the Sea Peoples carries a secondary meaning that Egyptologists have noted but rarely emphasized. The same root used for people from the great circle of water was applied in ritual contexts to beings from the Juat, the Egyptian otherworldly realm. Whether this is linguistic coincidence or deliberate ambiguity in the Egyptian records has never been resolved. 10 civilizations. From Mohenjo-daro's radioactive streets to the Anasazi's abandoned turquoise. From the Sumerian scribes who wrote down that their teachers came from the sky, to the Nazca, who carved the message into the earth for whatever was looking down. Tiwanaku, with its impossible stone tolerances and its oral tradition that says the builders weren't its own people. The Minoans, with an undecoded script that may contain every answer. The Akkadians, whose capital city 3,000 years of archaeology cannot find. Easter Island's unfinished statues and the boats that glowed. Gobekli Tepe's buried warning and no graves. And the Bronze Age, destroyed by people no civilization has ever been able to name. The pattern doesn't prove anything. It suggests everything. If you're still watching, from wherever in the world you are, subscribe, leave a comment about which civilization unsettles you most, and like the video. These stories deserve to be remembered, especially when we can't explain them.